Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Let's Have Renaissance, a podcast about writing, editing, publishing, literature, the arts, and more. I am Ito Otini.
And I'm Makaya Otini, and today we're speaking with Ray Lustig and Maximilien Hein. Ray is a classical composer and rock musician with a background in molecular biology and a persistent interest in science, nature, and the mind. Max is his longtime collaborator, a senior staff audio engineer at the Hit Factory, whose research on spatial audio has been published by the Audio Engineering Society. We're excited to be with them today.
Thank you for tuning in. We're excited that you're here. Why don't you also subscribe, like, comment, and share this episode with your friends?
And if you know anyone who wants to come on the podcast, please do send them our way. Also, if you haven't yet, sign up for our free newsletter where we share updates, resources, and opportunities. To support the podcast, you can make a one-time donation through our website or purchase a subscription to our blog where you'll find more premium content and resources at thedatekeepers.com. Thank you for being a part of our community.
Ray and Max, thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to have you both. Can you please each introduce yourselves?
Hi, thank you. Yes, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. My name is Ray Lustig, and I'm a composer.
I'm Maximilien Hein. I'm a recording and mixing engineer.
It's great to have you guys. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got to know each other and how long you've been collaborating and what your collaboration is like?
Yes, sure. Max and I met when I was looking to hire a composer's assistant, really. I was just kind of overwhelmed with projects that I was working on. And I just put out an ad, and he was coming from NYU Steinhardt's graduate program in music production, which is a really prestigious program. And, I talked to a few people, and Max was he seemed head and shoulders above. And we started working together. Things can go great or things can go not great, but it went fantastically. And we started working together with him, helping me doing some recording projects and other types of composition projects and everything. And it went so well that we just kept going, and we put out an entire album with my band, Manicberg, in collaboration with my partner, Luigi Porto. He and I founded the band, and now it's a band of 5 people. Actually 6 if you put in Max there, because Max is really central to the sound of Manicberg.
The sixth Beatle.
The sixth Beatle, exactly. So as we were working on that project, Max and I started other side projects, a whole other band project, as well as the project that we're most excited about because it's being released today. So this has been many, many years, even decades in the making. The album has been about 2.5 years in the making, but comes from a project that's been around for a very long time. It's called Semmelweis.
And how did you guys build the trust? I really love when we bring people who work with each other and trust each other, because Max does different things that you can't do on your own for whatever reason. How did you guys build that trust?
Yep. Maybe I'll give it over to Max now so that he can introduce himself a little bit and respond to that same question.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because that permeates so much of my work, like across the board, not just with Ray, but like anytime I go into a session with an artist, the trust factor is, I don't know if I want to say uniquely important aspect of being a studio engineer, but I mean, an artist comes into the studio and I'm meeting them for the first time and I have to make sure that they feel comfortable spilling their emotional, musical, lyrical guts on the microphone, giving an authentic performance in front of me who they've just met 30 seconds ago, and so that's a huge factor in what I do just across the board. And so I think this is different because we spend so much time working together, but that is always something that's at the forefront of my mind. And I think, first of all, having like a welcoming disposition is good and in these initial moments, but certainly the more you work with someone, if there's a click, as I feel we've had between me and Ray, there's a lot that we see eye to eye on. And yeah, I mean, that all comes into play, but certainly at this point, the amount of time that we've worked together plays a huge, huge role in that.
So since the latest album is the one that you're most excited about, let's talk about that. How did you first begin to conceive of it? What themes do you treat? How did you find the sound? Just all that good stuff.
Well, maybe I'll kick it off because I was working on this project before Max and I started working on it. He and I have been working about 2.5 years on it, but before that, it was a theater project. It's called Semmelweis. And it's inspired by the story of an obstetrician, an 18th century obstetrician in Europe in the Vienna Allgemeine Krankenhaus. an important mid-19th century public hospital that still exists, founded by Empress Maria Theresa to be a hospital, particularly with an angle toward healthcare for young indigent women who didn't have a lot of resources. And in this hospital, there was a delivery ward, and there were actually two different wards. And this particular obstetrician, Ignaz Semmelweis, who is today known as the one who discovered the significance of hand washing in general, but particular in medical care. But at the time, it's because he was contending with an outbreak of what's called puerperal fever or childbed fever, which was a disease that was afflicting women in the hours around giving birth. And it was a horrific epidemic, and the death from childbed fever was really excruciating. And Semmelweis and all of his colleagues at the Allgemeine Krankenhaus in Vienna were desperately trying to solve this problem. And it was really sad because it was poor women. They were coming to this public hospital for this treatment, and they were, at its high point, 33% death rate. So it was just absolutely abysmal. And the harder they worked, the worse the problem seemed to get. But it was Ignaz Semmelweis who had this particular temperament. That's what's really cool about it. His temperament as a scientist and as a thinker were both what allowed him to see what nobody else could see, but also what really in the end killed him and caused a question to his legacy. What he was noticing was that the women from the neighboring midwives ward, the ward where women were giving birth with the help of a midwife, were dying at a lower death rate than the ward where his doctor trainees were treating women. And it was something that the doctors did not want to admit. It was a time of prideful exuberance in medicine. Physicians had newly moved into obstetrics, and they felt that their incredible knowledge and background and hard working ethic was going to be a great improvement to care of women in delivery. It was an all-male type of environment, and so they were kind of dismissive of the women's ward in general. There was a certain arrogance to their exuberance. So Semmelweis already met with a lot of opposition when he pointed out that there was this discrepancy in death rates. And he began trying to tease that apart and figure out what's going on here. What is it that the midwives are doing that the doctors are not doing? What is it that the midwives are not doing that the doctors are doing? He tried to emulate what the midwives were doing. And he did notice a subtle but to him convincing difference once he tried to implement some of these practices of the midwives, in particular hand washing. And in an extremely busy, very dirty hospital in the mid-19th century, 20 years before the germ theory of disease, as people were walking around with lab coats encrusted with filth, and they almost took pride in how filthy they were. It was a sign of how hard they worked. It was really inconceivable to people to get them to stop, get these very, very busy physicians to stop and wash in these washing bowls. It was uncomfortable, it was a stringent washing, and it seemed like a waste of time to them. So he met with a lot of opposition there and trying to get them to actually do this. But to the extent that he was able to get them to participate in this, he noticed an improvement. And there really was no explanation for this improvement in his time because he couldn't really point to what the mechanism was. The later clue that came along to him was that a good friend of his, Jakub Kolečka, who was a prosector, a person who performed autopsies as a specialty, was cut by accident on his hand while performing an autopsy, and then started to get very sick, and then within 5 days had died. And that rang a bell for Semmelweis. He said, wait a minute, that's the same length of time that it takes for all these women when they start becoming sick to die. So he wanted to see the autopsy results of his friend Jakub Kolečka, and he noticed that the autopsy results looked a lot like those of all the women who he'd been autopsying from the deaths on his ward for many, many years. He saw the same exact symptoms, and he said, wait a minute, I think this is a man who's died of what we had formerly thought was a women's disease. What's going on here? And that was how he hypothesized something called what he was calling death particles, because there really was not a lot of recognition yet in the day of microbes in the human body. And so what was happening was a systemic infection that was coming about because doctors, in a desperate effort to try to stop this awful pandemic, were going from the examination ward into the autopsy suite to try to figure out what's happening here, to relate the two, what's happening in the dead bodies, what's happening in the living bodies. And of course, without washing their hands. And that was bringing deadly infection from the bodies of the dead women into the bodies of healthy living women, and just making the cycle ever worse the harder they worked. And the crazy thing about this story to me is just the denial factor, but it makes perfect sense, really. Like, if you're a very hardworking, very passionate physician and prideful, it can be very, very difficult for you to swallow the news that you have inadvertently been killing these young mothers for potentially years or even decades. And that denial factor was incredibly strong. And so Semmelweis came up against a brick wall of denial. And he was a bit of an abrasive person. And his abrasiveness led him to be very, very impatient and very intolerant of anyone who didn't listen to what he was trying to tell them. And he started running around calling people murderers in public and taking out open letters accusing his colleagues of murdering women by not listening to what he's saying. He wasn't publishing his results in a timely manner, and he was just becoming very oppositional. And alongside this, he was also beginning to lose his mind, be that from circumstantial reasons of what was happening or because of what was seen as an occupational hazard of his day, which was syphilis. An obstetrician of that time would have spent a lot of time, especially in a public hospital, dealing with prostitutes and dealing with people who were suffering from STDs. And so contracting syphilis was very common amongst obstetricians in the time. So it's impossible to know exactly what the cause was, but he grew more and more unpredictable and more abrasive, and was eventually institutionalized. He was kind of raving in the institution, desperate to convince people that he was right all along, and he suffered a beating in the asylum that he was in, a severe beating, and he ended up dying of infection from this beating, which is really the very thing that he had been after trying to prevent all of his life. That story always struck me very strongly because there are many lessons, really. But the big takeaway, I think, is I worked in the sciences and my wife is a physician, and I've spent a lot of time around scientists, and I have a lot of friends who are scientists and physicians. And the theme really is the sad delay in our ability as a species to adapt to a great new insight, because every time we have a paradigm shift, there are some who are left behind, and there can be a lot of resistance from those left behind. And in this particular case, the incredible pathos of what they were facing, that these are mothers who are giving birth to babies who are dying, and it's the fault of the physicians not doing this certain act of washing their hands. The denial factor must have just been far worse than most other situations. I mean, certainly no physician likes to think that they've been killing their patients, mothers of all people. So when I first got interested in this story, for me, it was very emotional and very powerful. And there were so many symbols that it occurred to me. And so I reached out to my friend, Matthew Doherty, who's a poet friend of mine from college. And he and I started doing some work as a part of a project run by a group called American Opera Projects in Brooklyn, New York. And they had a program to try to incubate new project ideas like this called Composers and the Voice. And so we started there, and that was I think it was 2007, really, really long time ago. Long story short, after many, many showings along the way and world premieres that were not so world premieres, where, it's sort of a very rough idea being put forth in front of the public and a lot of struggling, we finally decided, hey, let's just make the whole work as an album. And maybe I should stop talking and hand it over to Max at this point.
I love the story.
Max, what condition was the composition in when you came in, and how did it evolve? And what choices did you guys make together to shape the final sound of the music?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's figure out where to start, because there's kind of a lot of decisions along the way that came together. So I guess when I got started with the making of the album, there were some existing recordings that ended up on the final product. And there was a lot that we re-recorded or produced anew or took in a different direction. There's a recording aesthetic of transparent capture where you put up the mics and they play the piece down and you're just trying to stay out of the way. And one of the big departures from the traditional classical music recording aesthetic that we took was that we wanted the record to be more produced and stuff. And so there's a lot of elements that don't exist in the stage production that do exist in the recording. We didn't want to be limited in that way. And so there's orchestrational changes and there's delays and synthesizers and like all tastefully used, not like suddenly a Daft Punk record or something. But we consciously chose to give ourselves the freedom to explore the work in this new medium without the limits of kind of where it came from. It's 20 tracks in total. Some of the pieces are more of that kind of capture recording. Like there's one or two strictly choral pieces that we did just kind of leave as like, okay, here's the choir and they sing the piece down kind of thing. And then there are other tracks that we completely reimagined. When we finished, we sent them off to the mastering engineer, and the first thing he emailed back to us was, have y'all considered doing an immersive version? And so then we went back through everything and we mixed it again in immersive.
And can you define these terms for people who are not familiar with them? What is the difference between immersive and like...
So traditional music format is a stereo format, which means that there's two channels of audio and everything in the left channel is baked into the left channel, all jumbled together. It's like a cake that you can't unbake kind of thing. And what really differentiates immersive audio is the advent of the new technology called object-based audio, where instead of having everything baked into a channel, every sound source is represented by an object. So you have like a vocal object and a bass object, and these things aren't rendered down and baked together until it reaches the consumer. And that allows you, in combination with multi-channel formats, to translate that immersiveness more democratically.
Just to add one thing to what Max was saying, what all the technical concerns that Max was talking about were really beautifully conceived for the artistic goals of the album. From the very get-go of working on this, my collaborator Matt Doherty and I always had the notion that this story was as if being told from within the psyche of Ignaz Semmelweis as he's on the floor of the asylum, as he's dying, and really as he's being haunted by all of the mothers that he was never able to save. He wonders whether it was his own fault. Had he fumbled the ball with his idea? So it's really that haunting that pervades the album. The character of Ignaz Semmelweis only has 5 songs out of the 20 on the album. All of the rest are solos of women, the choir of women surrounding him, and the choir of women is on almost all of Semmelweis's tracks as well. So he really is surrounded, overwhelmed, and haunted by these women. And so the use of immersive atmos to sort of create that very, very rich and overwhelming sense of surrounding was something we were really, really excited about. And we feel like it really expressively did what it needed to do for the artistic goals of the album.
That's really cool.
Thank you guys so much. We've had a great time talking with you, and it's great having you on.
Thank you so much. You guys are terrific, and looking forward to hearing more of your work.
Likewise.
Same.
Thank you.
Y'all take care.
You too. Good luck with it all. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.